Hello, everybody. Welcome to Exploring Reality. Today we have a friendly inter-Christian dialogue. Stay tuned. How's it going, guys? Travis and Daniel, welcome to the channel. How are you guys doing?
Hey, doing great, doing great. Glad to be here.
Awesome.
Hello.
Well, today we are having like I said, a friendly inter-Christian discussion. Before we get into things, I guess, Travis, you've been on the show before, but do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So a little about me, Travis. Education-wise, I'm almost finished with my Master's of Science in Atmospheric Science. Ministry-wise, I'm part of the Reasons to Believe team, headed up by Hugh Ross. Also do volunteer outreach work, and in my spare free time, I also have a passion for the philosophy of religion, and really enjoy just looking into these interesting philosophical, theological considerations.
Awesome. All right, Daniel, this is your first time being with us. Why don't you introduce yourself, kind of tell everybody what you're about, and plug in your stuff as well.
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm Daniel. I'm from Nigeria, and I'm basically an undergrad student. I'm studying computer science, and so, but in my spare time, I really enjoy topics surrounding philosophy and apologetics and theology. And so, I do a lot of reading and a lot of writing on that topic. So, um, my blog and my YouTube channel both named Christocentric philosophy. So that's where I publish some of my thoughts on apologetics and philosophy and theology. And I also have authored one book,
Oh,
which is titled The Folly of Unbelief. So that's basically all there is to know about me.
Awesome. Do you have any links that I can put in the description for you or anything like that that
Uh,
people should be aware of? I know
maybe
you
your
have a
blog.
Facebook page, right?
yeah, I do.
Okay.
But so basically, you can get my blog is on um, pushingtheantithesis.blogspot.com. So that's basically you can get all the links to the other stuff
Awesome.
there.
Yeah, I'll put all that in the description of the video tonight or early tomorrow morning, depending on how long we go tonight. Yeah. Well, okay. So it sounds like Travis, you wanted to kind of give your thoughts
Um,
on your position a little bit. So the
yeah,
format, I figured the format could just be like let's just give each other at least like a little bit of time to kind of give our perspective, our position, and then we can
sure.
kind of go into that open dialogue. If you guys are
Yeah,
okay with that, because at least for the viewers, especially, it might be helpful to kind of give a bird's eye view of what your positions might be. Some viewers might not know what an evidentialist is. Some people might know what a presuppositionalist might be, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
yeah. Okay, sounds good. So basically, I kind of debated on whether I wanted to just go off the cuff. But I went ahead and jotted some notes down, so I'll just kind of go off that. And first of all, I want to say thank you to Dan and Daniel. Really looking forward to this conversation. I think disagreement invites intellectual humility, and also that, like Rasmussen would say, reason can also shine a light onto our path as we explore these interesting topics. And so, yeah. All right. So basically, what I wanted to do is present. It's basically a Swinburne style to natural theology, and how I think it can inform our revealed theology and actually all aspects of theology and everyday life as well. So there are two types of explanations. One, in terms of animate explanation, that some object has the power to bring about some effect and the liability to exercise that power under certain conditions. The second is in terms of powers, beliefs, and purposes, that is, intentional or a personal explanation. Different phenomena are explained in different ways. Some events are brought about intentionally by personal agents, and some events are brought about by inanimate things. Physics and chemistry provide inanimate explanations of events occurring, then other fields like psychology, sociology, and forensic science provides personal explanations. Inanimate objects have all of a similar kind, all have similar powers and liability to exercise those powers under different conditions. For example, copper expands because it has the power to do so and the liability to act on that power when heated, just like water has the power to freeze and the liability to exercise that power when cooled below 32 degrees. Inanimate explanations can be summarized as an initial condition plus a law of nature causing some event. Likewise, a personal explanation will invoke powers, beliefs, and purposes. So, like I used the example of an inanimate explanation, a personal explanation would say that the copper expanded because I applied heat to it, and the water froze because I just simply put it in the freezer. By a personal theistic explanation, I mean that God's power and purposes creates the physical world and gives objects their powers and liability to act. Or, in a traditional way, God creates the universe and sustains it in being. As Swinburne would say, the personal explanation model of explanation is, like the inanimate one, unavoidable in our thinking about the world. And so this is where I think we can take a cue from the philosophy of science and apply it to our natural theology, as the same criteria can be used for both inanimate and personal explanations. The claim that some scientific theory should be rendered probable is the extent to which, one, it leads us to expect, with accuracy, many and varied events which we observe, and we do not observe any events whose non-occurrence it leads us to expect. Two, what is proposed is simple, has explanatory power, and can unify independent pieces of data into the explanation. Three, it fits well with our background knowledge, if available. And four, we would not otherwise expect to find these events. In other words, there is no rival theory which leads us to expect these events that satisfies the criteria of 1 through 3, as well as does our purported theory. What I will mean by a best explanation is an explanation or theory which satisfies best these four criteria. An example would be in explaining the position of Uranus by Newtonian laws, which of course are that a body in motion will continue in that motion until acted upon by an outside force. The force of an object is equal to its mass times its acceleration, and for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, along with the law of gravitation. Namely, the gravitational force between two masses is proportional to each of the masses and irreversibly proportional to the radius squared. But if all that does not lead us to expect exactly what we observe, we may postulate that there is another planet beyond Uranus which we cannot observe pulling it out of orbit. If we cannot see this planet, the obvious question becomes, what grounds are there for supposing it's even there? One powerful way is that we would have to have abandoned Newton's theory, which in the absence of postulating another unobserved planet would be unable to predict the behavior of Uranus. So the simplest account of a vast number of phenomena is that Newton's theory is true and that the planets in the solar system include the as then yet unobserved planet Neptune. So further grounds for asserting the existence of Neptune would be provided if the supposition of its existence would explain otherwise inexplicable phenomena. In postulating this, we observe that these entities and the scientific theory about the powers and liabilities to act on objects together best satisfies the four criteria listed. Keeping in mind that one facet of simplicity is to postulate few objects. If postulating one unobserved planet suffices to lead us to expect the phenomena we find, we have no need to postulate 4 or 5 planets. This is, of course, how we discovered the planet Neptune. Now, in addition to the discovery of Neptune, based on this same 4 criteria, is what led us to postulate cosmic inflation to explain the early features of the cosmos. As we know from the history of science, we have special relativity and then general relativity updating our background knowledge of Newtonian laws. Einstein's fudge factor, which is corrected in 1929 by Edwin Hubble's discovery of the redshift. In other words, galaxies were moving away from one another, which meant the universe was expanding. Theoretical work in the 1940s showed that Big Bang models produced a radiation that pervades the universe. In the early 1960s, Otto Penzias and Robert Wilson conducted experiments using a radiometer designed for satellite communications and radio astronomy. In 1964, they swept the beam of the instrument across the sky and found a background present in the microwave regions of the electromagnetic spectrum, and this matched the temperatures predicted by the theory. Fast forward to about 1970, when we have the Hawking-Penrose theorem that showed that if we wound the tape of the universe back, so to speak, it would collapse into a singularity. So what happens then is what's known as the horizon and flatness problems. Basically, the theories predicted that the universe should be swimming in magnetic monopoles, and further was the mystery of looking at the cosmic microwave background. We noticed that it was uniform. In other words, regions that had never even touched each other all had the same temperature variation. So it was either we abandoned special and general relativity or solved this apparent problem. In 1981, we have Alan Guth, who postulates cosmic inflation, which is basically a very brief hyperexpansion rate of in the early moments of the universe. And it turns out that this brief hyperexpansion would predict both an absence of magnetic monopoles and the uniformity in the cosmic microwave background. So we see the theory of cosmic inflation was simple. It unified independent pieces of data and led us to expect the observations in the cosmos that we have. And of course, there are other examples that can be used to show how fields like archaeology, forensic science, even detective work, and so forth use this same criteria in terms of a personal explanation. But I think this gives us a basic outline of how this method has a proven track record in the philosophy of science for discovering true hypotheses. Now, since Daniel and I are both Christians, I'll skip the part of how this criteria shows that God is the best explanation that would lead us to expect the observations we find in reality. For that, I recommend Josh Rasmussen's argument from arbitrary limits that includes his perfect foundation argument, as well as Richard Swinburne's cumulative case in the existence of God. So just as in science, where if a theory leads us to expect comets will move on elliptical paths around the sun, we would have reason to believe some observational report of an observer of a comet being seen in a place where it would be seen if it was moving from its previous position along such a path. As Swinburne says, I believe there is a significant amount of evidence provided by very general features of the world and of human experience for the existence of God, and that various public phenomena, like the existence of the physical universe, its conformity to simple, intelligible laws, as well as these processes bringing about human persons who are conscious, have moral awareness, and opportunities to mold themselves and each other for both good and ill, and the fact that so many have had experiences of the presence of God. This makes it quite probable that there is a God. We can call this evidence the evidence of natural theology. Clearly, the stronger the arguments of natural theology for the existence of God, the more reason we have to expect a revelation from God. Obviously, it's only if there is a God that there can be a revelation from God. But even if there is a God, the question becomes, why should we expect that he would reveal things to us at all? I think the answer is that there are matters in which it would be very good for us to know, which are such that either we could not find them out for ourselves, or we have not previously proved persistent or honest enough with ourselves to do so. For example, it would be good for us to know more about God's nature than we do, for which we need a revelation, like, for example, the fact that he is triune. We need a model of how to lead our lives and moral principles to follow, and so God has some motivation to become incarnate and give us this example in the person of Christ and the teaching of the Gospels. If God loves each of us individually, then he has some motivation to relate to us in a personal way, to tell us special things about himself and ourselves. A God who made rational creatures has a reason to relate to them in a personal way and give them a revelation. So using this criterion method, which is the same in natural theology, or put more simply, these instances of revelation are observations we would expect given God as the theory of ultimate reality. So we can use this natural theology to also tease out aspects we would expect to find in revealed theology. It seems to me that this method has even more practical examples. One I can think of is that if we're interpreting passages in Scripture to find out a truth about God, for example, his foreknowledge and predestination of future events, and there are competing interpretations, we can look at the most simple explanation of the passages that would also unify independent passages and form an inference to the best explanation of what simply and effectively unifies the variety of passages, making one interpretation more probable than competing interpretations. Or let's say Daniel and I are talking to a Unitarian. We would rightly mention that the observation of various passages indicating that God is triune would be very surprising under that theory, and that God being triune would much more likely lead us to expect the observation of various passages indicating that he is triune. And so we can kind of like flesh this out more in the conversation, but that's just a basic outline of where I'm coming from.
Cool. Thank you, Travis. Daniel, you can kind of just give your perspective, your methodology, and then once you're done, I'll pretty much just kick myself out so you guys can have your open discussion.
All right, thank you. So I think I really appreciate Travis's thoughts on this, and I find myself in agreement with a lot of what he's saying, but with a few exceptions. Now, there are a lot of things to say, and I'll try my best to kind of keep things streamlined. So the first thing I want to point out is that the scientific method in itself, or this approach of assessing theories based on their, for example, alignment with the data and explanation or explanatory scope and simplicity and things like that, that approach in general, I think is a rational approach. I think I don't really have a problem with it. I like what you said at the end there, that perhaps even when we're debating interpretations of certain texts, we can appeal to such methods in order to settle disputes over interpretation. And I think, yeah, that's exactly what I would endorse that. And I think that really brings us nicely to a distinction I want to make, which is the distinction between what we can call the dogmatic use of natural theology and the pre-dogmatic use of natural theology. What you mentioned about settling disputes over theological positions or interpretation of text, I think that falls under dogmatic use of natural theology. And basically, the dogmatic use of natural theology is the use of reason and logic and argumentation to further explicate what is taught in scripture or revelation, right? So basically, from the basis of revealed theology, from the basis of scripture, we can say that, okay, this theological position best explains the various scriptural data that we have. So that's basically an exercise in natural theology, but that is the dogmatic use. Is kind of using logic and reason apart from revealed theology as a kind of way to establish the truth of Christianity or of revelation. And that, I think, what you outlined in the first part is that was a pre-dogmatic use. So when you say something like you mentioned Swinburne's approach to natural theology, where you give these kinds of arguments and perhaps try to show that theism is simple and has explanatory power and stuff like that, and then from there you try to explain how this God, the nature of God, from his existence, we first establish his existence, then try to think about his nature, and then try to derive the motivations for revelation from that. I think that is a kind of pre-dogmatic use of natural theology. So basically, you're trying to build up natural theology from kind of just reason, like So we start with intuitions, and using reason and logic, we end up with the existence of, for example, a necessary being. And from that, we use our intuitions and reason again to get to uh, a personal God who wants to reveal himself. So I don't have a problem with the first approach to natural theology, which is the dogmatic approach. I think reason is an important tool that God has given us, and I think the scientific method, however it is construed, is in general a very rational and reliable method for settling intellectual disputes. That isn't the problem. But what I would take issue with is the pre-dogmatic use, because I don't think that we can conceive of reason apart from Christian theology. I think there are various problems that arise when we try to separate reason and logic from revealed theology, or try to use them as a basis for revealed theology. And perhaps so I think this is the major distinction that I want to make, and I think this is where we should begin our discussion from.
Awesome. Is that all you got for now, Daniel?
Yeah, so perhaps
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll what I'll do then is I'll just kind of kick myself out, and then you guys can talk. I'll jump back in if I need to, but I don't foresee that happening. We're at 23 minutes so far, so I can, unless you guys kind of decide earlier than this, I'll give it to like the 1 hour mark pretty much. So another 40 minutes.
Yeah.
sure, that's
Cool.
fine.
Sounds good. Have fun.
Okay. Yeah. So I really appreciate what you said, Daniel. I think there's a lot of value in what you have to say and what you bring to the table, and I really appreciate your concerns. I like how you laid out, where your agreement was, and then where your disagreement was with the dogmatic, pre-dogmatic usage. And so this kind of, with this background of where we agree, so there's this nuance where we would disagree, and perhaps that disagreement might be significant. And so, yeah, let's kind of couch on that for a little bit. So with your you said that you think we should start from Christian theology and then derive our reason from that foundation, as opposed to sort of the reverse, that we use this principles of reason and we see how it leads to God. So am I tracking correct?
Yeah, that's basically it. I think
Okay. Yeah.
I think our starting point, both in theology or philosophy or epistemology, should be
Right.
revealed theology. I think we have to start from there when
Right.
doing theology, right?
Yeah, and so I'm very sympathetic to that, and I appreciate that. Even as a Christian, we want to start with Christ. So I do track with what you're saying there. A problem I would have with that is how are we justifying our use of Christian theology? Like you said, we start from like Christian theology, that we need the Christian God to get these principles of reason off the ground. I'm wondering what justifies that, though, because when you go back to what I mentioned earlier with this idea of the scientific method, how we discover scientific theories, the discovery of Neptune, cosmic inflation, whatnot. This methodology, this inductive methodology, has a proven track record, so we know it works, right? And so I'm not seeing the difficulty in that leading us to God. Whereas when we start there, I'm a little bit concerned about how we justify that on a rational basis.
All right, okay. Yeah, so this that's a pretty standard concern many people have with this kind of approach. But I would like to point out something first. So I would say, okay,
Sure.
so what you propose is that we use this kind of scientific inductive method to first establish um, the revelation and things like that. So what I would point out is that
Right.
I think the way um, our conceptual framework is structured as human beings, I think method, epistemologically speaking, method is always tied to some broader system, right? You cannot
Mm-hmm.
just utilize a method in isolation, right? Whenever you apply a certain method, that
Mm-hmm.
method is kind of presupposing some larger framework or worldview. And
Okay.
so,
Sure.
yeah, so the question then becomes, if we use this scientific method or inductive method, we have to ask
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, what framework, what worldview are we presupposing when we use this method? And so, and I think
Right.
the answer really comes down to two options. You either presuppose the Christian, or you presuppose the non-Christian, or the negation of the Christian worldview. And so, I think this
Hmm.
I think this need for a kind of neutral method is kind of is naive, because I don't think there's a neutral method, because every method
Ah.
presupposes some worldview in some way. And so, as a Christian, I
Right.
decide to
Mm-hmm.
presuppose the Christian worldview, and so all my methodology would presuppose that system.
Yeah. Again, I really like what you're saying there, and I see the value in it. That we're going to be starting from somewhere. Here, and I think this highlights even further where a distinction that I think you and I would have is that I do think it's very important that we start from a neutral basis and build our way there. That it's neither naturalistic, like overly, atheistic, uh, or theistic. I think these principles of reason, it's kind of like Rasmussen would say that we can build a bridge of reason to God. I think reason leads to God, as he would say. And so I think that gives us a lot more epistemic justification than if we start from uh, Christian theism, because it's commonly said that with this idea of needing to presuppose, like to get the principles of reason going, a concern I would have with sort of and it's not just the presuppositionalist method. I think William Lane Craig does basically does this with his approach too, is this deductive formulation, because I see naturalists have competing explanations, and so I don't think one has to presuppose Christianity to get the principles of reason going. But I do think that Christian theism is the best explanation of the principles of reason. And so, yeah, a concern I'm going to have with that methodology is, what do we do with the competing hypotheses out there? And so that's why I like this method, because it can tease it out and show that, hey, no, theism is the best there is. If
All
that
right,
makes sense.
yeah,
If that makes sense.
I understand what you're saying, and I think it's a valid concern. But and so, okay, so if I were to kind of try and characterize your approach,
Okay.
you're trying to say that there are these various hypotheses, like we can conceive of them as hypotheses. So we have the
Mhm.
Christian, we have the naturalist, or perhaps we also have the Islamic and stuff like that. These different hypotheses, and you're trying to
Sure.
show through this inductive method that
Mhm.
the Christian hypothesis is the best explanation for reality, right? Is
Yeah,
that
they're
correct?
the most. Yeah, we could do it in inductive terms as the most probable, or I think also in abductive terms that it best explains the observations we have in reality. So what I like about this method is it doesn't have to, it doesn't have to presuppose it, in a sense that it has a way of rationally justifying it. Whereas with the other, when we just presuppose it. I think it's in tension with these competing hypotheses, and so I don't, it's hard to presuppose when there are like legitimate explanations. So you think of like atheistic Platonism, Hegelian idealism, these various other worldviews that can, in principle, sort of account for like the applicability of mathematics, the principles of reason, even objective morality. Now, I don't think they work compared to theism, but yeah. So that's a concern I have with presupposing is that I don't think it adequately deals with the competing hypotheses.
All right.
What do you
Okay.
think?
Okay. Yeah. So obviously, this will be on one point which we disagree because I think
Okay.
I think that this method that I'm proposing is basically to say that we have this starting point, and
Mhm.
everyone has a starting point, right?
Sure.
And so the problem that we have epistemologically is that different starting points would produce different methods, and which in turn would produce different conclusions. And so we're
Okay.
kind of like in a kind of circular system. Each person has his own framework in which he uses to interpret reality and stuff like that, and that would
Mhm.
greatly influence the way he interprets his
Hmm.
experience and the facts and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And so what we have is some kind of relativism, and that's a problem because we do
Hmm.
not want we do not want to say that we just believe arbitrarily, right? So we
Sure.
cannot say that okay, you have your worldview, I have my worldview, and there's nothing that's just fideism, and that's irrational, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so the way we avoid this problem is to kind of uh, kind of go for kind of transcendental
Yeah.
method of disqualifying hypotheses, as you call them. So
Sure.
the way we address competing systems with this method is just to analyze them transcendentally and try to show
Sure.
internal inconsistencies with
Hmm.
their entire system.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we're making progress here. So we've kind of outlined where we disagree on this aspect. Why I go about the method that I do, or why you go about the method you do. So I kind of wanted to, perhaps move on to what you were saying just now with this idea of transcendental arguments. So I think this is interesting because the approach that I would take would have this. So I'm going to use something like let's say I'm having a conversation with the naturalist, right? And I'll get back to revealed theology, but so I'd use something like Rasmussen's perfect foundation argument that hey, if we posit absolute perfection with purely positive qualities and lacks arbitrary limits, so if it has no limits, it's going to be more simple than a hypothesis that has these limits and has to tack on more theoretical content to explain the phenomena, right? So like with naturalism, and so and then I would also you could kind of tease out these various attributes, like from absolute perfection, that the foundation to ultimate reality is perfectly good, has purely positive qualities, is mental foundation, and so that would explain. So a mental foundation would most simply explain why we have agents with states of consciousness, right? It would best explain, a reasonable mathematical mind best explains why the universe has such a mathematical texture to it, right? That it's describable in mathematical terms. And so it's interesting that I use an inductive, or in this case, actually abductive method, but it has a transcendental type texture to it. But you'll notice it's abductive and inductive. And so, again, I don't think we would be presupposing anything, even though it has that transcendental texture to it. It's not presuppositional in nature. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. What I would say is that okay, I would say perhaps it can be construed in a transcendental fashion, perhaps with
Okay.
some kind of reformulation. But I wouldn't say that the way Rasmussen presents it is transcendental. Although I would admit I haven't really read Rasmussen's presentation of the argument. But from the way you describe it, I wouldn't say it's a transcendental argument,
Okay.
although it can be. So, but when it comes to stuff like transcendental arguments, I'd say that what matters is not the form, but the content. So you can have a transcendental deductive argument, you can have a transcendental abductive argument, or you can have a transcendental inductive argument. And so, what really makes transcendental arguments stand out is the fact that they deal with the what we call the preconditions of rational thought. So we're trying to find out what is necessary for our experience to be coherent and intelligible. And that entire exercise is what defines the transcendental method or program. So the reason why the transcendental approach is really effective when paired with this kind of presuppositional methodology is that we do not want to concede that there is kind of neutrality, right? We don't want to concede that there is neutral ground. If there is no neutral ground, then we have to find a way to critique or to refute alternative hypotheses without begging the question against them. And I think the way to do that is to just examine them on their own terms and show that they are internally inconsistent or they fail to preserve rational thought and things like that. So I think that is the gist of the transcendental method.
Yeah, and I thank you so much for laying that out. I think that's helpful, and it kind of shows where our views are distinguished is that with the methodology that you used, that you need this as a precondition for intelligibility, whereas my view is more that, well, hey, look, if the foundation of ultimate reality is mental and intelligible, it would most parsimoniously explain why we have the principles of reason and applicability of mathematics and so forth. So I think that's really good to kind of highlight our differences there. And so let's kind of go back and couch for a little bit on revealed theology and how it correlates. So what would you think of the method that I went by earlier, that we want to know from revealed theology, like, why would God reveal, want to reveal himself to us, and what would he want to reveal? In other words, how do we know that it's the scripture is valid? And so I just wanted to kind of put out there that I think this could be a valuable tool to say, when we use this inductive, abductive, like Rasmussian and Swinburne type approach, we can say that, God is absolute perfection, is perfectly good, right? And so he will love each of us collectively and individually. And so that would give him motivation to give us a revelation. I think both internally with the witness of the Holy Spirit at times, and, in an external environment with revealed theology, like I was saying, to tell us things that, that we're not capable of knowing on our own. Like, for example, that he's triune, that I think, we can kind of tease out that, God, if he is all good, would want to, give us an example of how to live our lives. And I think also, if, like Swinburne would say, that, if he permits us to suffer, that he would also suffer with us, that so he takes that upon himself and gives us that example to live by and everything. And so where I think we have the value teased out is that it would lead us, it will kind of give us an idea of what type of revelation we would expect, given that. So.
All right. So what I would say to that is that I think it's it's either it is from what you said, it strikes me as kind of
Sure.
speculative at worst, but at best, it is just presupposing revealed theology, right? Because if
Mm,
if we just we can speculate till we're blue in the face about the what kind of motivations a perfect being would have. Because if we're
mhm,
being honest, if God is truly absolute perfection and
mhm.
infinite, then he is nothing like us. He's is on a whole other metaphysical level,
Sure.
right? And
Yeah.
so it makes no sense to try and speculate on how this
Hmm.
being would have the kind of motivations and what kind of actions he would take from
Okay.
the perspective of finite beings,
Sure.
unless that transcendent, absolutely perfect being has given us revelation, has given us some information about what to think about him and about his
Okay.
nature. And so if he has done that, we can, on that basis, talk about him in more than just speculation. So I think
All right.
it either ends in speculation or it just ends up presupposing revealed theology anyway. That's what I think that's the response I'd give to that
Sure.
approach.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that's fair and, and valuable. I understand where you're uh, coming from, and I can sympathize with your concerns there. Um, however, here's the deal, and this is going to get into like if you read The Existence of God by Richard Swinburne, chapter 6. It's not. I don't think it's speculation. Okay, so what it is from absolute perfection, we can tease out the attributes of God. Okay, and so he would have purely positive qualities, and so he would lack arbitrary limits. And so with no arbitrary limits and purely positive qualities, he would be maximal goodness. And then, like, let's look at something like value, right? Well, value is a positive quality. So value can't come from non value. So we would say that value is built into the foundation of reality. And so, under the diffusion principle, that goodness is diffusive of itself, God has motivation as maximal goodness to pursue maximum value. And so, we can predict from that God will create valuable states of affairs and that he will continuously maximize those valuable states of affairs. And so this is even going to be compatible with classical theism. So, like, people like Rob Kuntz hold to this view also. And so we there is a method. It's not speculation. We can tease out from the attributes of God what sort of predictions we would expect. And by predictions, I mean observations. So we would expect God to instantiate valuable states of affairs. And so and that will kind of go back to what I was saying before, that if God will love each of us individually. And so it's not that he has to, but it gives him motivation to reveal himself to us in a personal way, give us a revelation and so forth. So, yeah, I just want to kind of like lay out the methodology that, where
Right.
like people like Swinburne are coming from.
Yeah. So okay, I'm glad that you laid it out that way because I think that leads me to my
Yeah.
to my even stronger criticism. It kind of builds up on the previous
Okay,
one.
sure.
I think this way of moving from natural theology as a basis
Mm-hmm.
to revealed theology kind of it seems to me that it reduces or does away with the transcendence and incomprehensibility of God. Because if God was a being that can be wholly grasped by our
Mm-hmm.
categories of reason, such that
Right.
we can almost exhaustively determine what he's
Mm,
like and what he
sure.
would do, what his motivations are. If we could do that, then it seems that God would just be a kind of on the same metaphysical plane as us. It kind of loses his transcendence.
Right.
There is
Mm-hmm.
no element of mystery or incomprehensibility about God
Mm,
in that sense. So it seems that we
yeah.
have made a God in the image of our own minds. I think that's a huge problem.
Right. Yeah. And so let me just first say, I agree with you in that aspect. And that is a typical, apophatic theological objection to like where Swinburne's coming from is, we're reducing, we're making him just like us. But I don't think that's the case. So when we talk, we're not doing it in terms of personhood. So we're saying that God is absolute perfection, pure perfection. And so, he's pure value, pure, maximum value, maximum goodness. And so maximum goodness will pursue maximum value, like, eternal, all powerful. He will pursue that value, right? And so I think it's important to realize that people like I'm not sure about Swim, but I know like Rasmussen. We're not saying that it's exhaustive in nature. So if it was that we could exhaustively predict, in the way that you were saying, I would go, well, yeah, I wouldn't hold to a method like that either. I mean, of course, I would reject it. No, we don't want to make God in our own image, but that's not what it's doing here. It's teasing out these general things that we would expect to find, and that namely value, that God has reason to pursue valuable states of affairs and to give and to maximize those valuable states of affairs. I don't see that as being controversial or making God into our image.
All right.
Yeah,
So here's,
sure.
if I can just try and push back a little bit more. Here's the
Yeah,
thing.
please.
I think you mentioned absolute perfection and maximum
Hmm.
value. I think those
Right.
concepts are kind of they're kind of grounded in our conceptual
Hmm.
schemes as humans. So it kind of like what Anselm
Hmm.
said about that God is the greatest being that can be conceived or something like that. So
Yeah,
here's,
greatest conceivable being.
yeah, right. So here's the thing. Our conception of greatness or maximum value or absolute perfection, that is
Hmm.
that conception does not even scratch the surface of the nature of God, right? Because
Right. Sure.
if God is truly incomprehensible, then we cannot even begin
Hmm.
to fathom what his nature is like. We can say he's absolute
Ah.
perfection, but even
Okay.
that, even saying that does not, we would just be okay. Perhaps we could try and think of our conceptual scheme as a kind of a box, and we try to move higher, and we reach the end, and we're unable to go further,
Hmm.
and we just say, okay, this is the maximum, this is the absolute perfection. But what
Hmm.
that just shows the limits of our conceptions. It doesn't show the limits
Right.
of what is metaphysically possible. So God, so we would have to say that God is kind of um, limited in a way by our conceptual schemes. We cannot conceive of a God
Right.
that transcends our conceptual scheme. And so the God
Okay.
that we would end up with would be a God that is finite because our conceptual schemes are finite.
Yeah, so I appreciate you highlighting the second objection. I think that kind of more clearly shines a light onto where our differences are. I'd like to kind of go back to what I said before, that God is not limited. He would be pure, unlimited. So we talk about, you mentioned like how we can fathom, like we can't fathom the greatness of God and everything. And I agree with you. So I don't think that these principles are exhaustive. In other words, that we can exhaustively predict what states of affairs God will create, how he will do it. Just that when we see value in the world, we know that maximum goodness has reason to pursue maximum value. And then I think what really I would reject the view of God that he is just like utterly incomprehensible. That we I agree with you that we can't fully comprehend them, but I would disagree with you that we can't comprehend some of him. So I think he's both immanent and transcendent, and that I think when we look at the world, we can, we do see God's fingerprints, so to speak, in nature, and we can use philosophical reasoning to get, just general ideas. Not that they have to be exhaustive. And so I think we would have a different conception of God. And then further with what you said in terms of God being just utterly comprehensible. So theism would have no predictive power that I can think of under that view. So I do have some concerns there in how we would justify belief in something like that, other than just like presupposing it. So it sounds like with that conception, I'm not seeing any, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I would point out that I agree with you. Like, I agree that God is both immanent and transcendent. Like, I'm not trying to say that God is utterly transcendent or wholly other, but I think that we have to take his transcendence and incomprehensibility seriously. So what I would say is that God is incomprehensible and transcendent to the point that apart from his voluntary condescension and self-revelation, we would be unable to know about him. That is what I say. If God left us alone, go ahead.
No. So as you were thinking, I think that's good. It's kind of like the Barthian view, in a sense. I have a friend who's really into Karl Barth. But when you say that, how are we justifying that? I don't see any way of justifying that apart from presupposing something like that. So if we don't have any way to logically tease out these various, observations and predictions we would expect to find, how are we justifying our belief in God at that point?
Right. So that's where revelation comes, right?
So we kind of would you say that we have to have revealed revelation in order to justify the belief of that nature of God?
Yes, I think revelation is necessary for knowledge of God. Yeah. So I think that's where the disagreement really comes down to, right?
Right. Yeah. And I appreciate you highlighting the fact that. So I think we have a disagreement about the nature of God because, I think I would fundamentally disagree that he's so wholly other, such that we can't tease out these logical conclusions about him in the natural world. So I appreciate you highlighting that. So I think that's where we have.
Let me make a distinction here, because perhaps so that we don't get things confused. I think I would make the distinction between general and special revelation, right? I think we can know God through the created order and through the natural world. When I said what I meant was that God is so incomprehensible that we cannot know him if he did not decide to reveal himself. But he did decide to reveal himself. He revealed himself in nature and in scripture. So we can know him through nature. So
I agree with you there.
Right, but I don't think that natural revelation entails this kind of pre-dogmatic natural theology, right? I think it's a more direct apprehension of the existence and nature of God, not anything that is grounded in some inference. So I think that an inference to the existence and nature of God wouldn't be possible if God did not already reveal himself.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how much disagreement I would have there. I think obviously, and this might highlight what I mean is that so I think God is an intelligent, rational, mathematical mind, and he's pure perfection. He's pure value, pure goodness. All these attributes, and I think so. When he creates the world, it has that texture to it, like his moral texture. the like intelligible texture of like mathematical applicability and things of that nature. So when he creates the created order, it has that texture on it, and so that's what I think people like Swinburne would look at the residual texture, so to speak, of what God has done, and we can make logical inferences in that way. I mean, would you be sympathetic to more modest approach like that?
Uh, so I think my problem isn't with the argument in itself, right? It's about
Mm-hmm.
the kind of theological underpinnings of the approach. So, for example,
Okay.
when you say that God is perhaps absolute perfection and maximum value and things like
Sure.
that, we could
Mhm.
ask where you're getting this definition of God, right?
Right. So, right. Do you want me to answer, or did you want-
Yeah. So yeah,
or-
sure. Perhaps you could perhaps give your answer.
yeah. Okay. Okay. So somebody like Rasmus, so it's basically a contingency argument. So you have a completing naturalistic explanation. So you think of like Graham Oppy's, necessary initial state, right? And so he's saying that if we postulate, as the foundation of reality, so it's not even a natural supernatural distinction. It's just like Rasmussen would say, the blob of everything. And so if the foundation to everything that exists in total is absolute perfection, from absolute perfection, you would tease out that it's purely positive qualities. In other words, pure actuality. And that's going to, it's not going to contain arbitrary limits, which are cutoffs without explanation. So then he would like look at people like Abby. So like these natural explanations, you would have to ask, why does it produce this amount of stars? And, why do neutrons and protons stick together in this way instead of that way? And so it doesn't make predictions, right? And so the explanations are going to be arbitrary. Whereas under absolute perfection, you can tease out predictions or expected observations. And I think where your concern is that it's not saying that we're exhaustively explaining what God would do, how He would do it, and things of that nature. It's just when you find something valuable, you've found something that God has motivation to bring about. It's like the diffusion principle. Goodness is just diffusive of itself.
All right. Okay. Maybe I should try and maybe bring this up from think about it a different way. So
Sure.
perhaps the way I would frame my one of my objections here is that I don't think you can get the concept of absolute perfection
Mm-hmm.
without revealed theology. I don't think
Okay.
one can get that concept, any concept of
Mm-hmm.
God or absolute perfection, that is gained apart from um, revealed theology would be deficient. I think
Okay. Yeah.
that's the way
Yeah.
I would put my objection.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate that. So, I mean, I do know where you're coming from. And even as a Christian, like I was saying earlier, I am sympathetic to it that, we need to presuppose Christianity to really get these concepts. And it would kind of come back to, what I was saying earlier is that my concern there is that we have no way of really epistemically justifying and laying that out. Whereas if we use this method, we can show how reason, in fact, again with these principles from the philosophy of science, we know they work. So it's how we discovered like Neptune, and things like that, the Big Bang, the expansion rate, and so like using this method, it has a proven track record in the philosophy of science. So I don't see any reason why we couldn't apply it to ultimate reality. And what's fascinating is that when we do use this type of method, it gets us to the conclusion, the same this Christian theism, because I would even argue that general theism that an entailment of general theism is Christian theism, a canonical theism. And so I think we have a way of epistemically justifying and teasing this out, and it gets us to the same position than if we just presuppose it. Because I'm kind of stuck on that. It's not. There's no justification if we just presuppose it. But maybe that's like it'll just have to be a point of disagreement.
I think he's. Oops. Oh,
It,
we lost him. Well, I'll give him a chance to get back in here. Because we're at that 1 hour mark.
okay.
We'll
Yeah,
see.
I guess
I'll message him quick.
Yeah, and when he gets back, maybe we're just kind of like wind down our closing thoughts. Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. I like Daniel. He's a cool guy.
This is a cool conversation so far.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, while we're waiting on Daniel to get back here,
You want me to start singing?
no. Ethan asks a question for you.
Mhm.
If we could get to God through our own reason, why does the Gospel of John spend so much effort explaining Christ came to bring light, referring to knowledge and revelation?
Yeah. Okay. So I know where Ethan's coming from, and I completely I love Ethan, but the where he's coming from, I just reject that model of God. I just outright reject it. But as far as what you're saying, I would say that Jesus, Christ is the logos, and so the fact that we're using these principles of reason that I'm talking about, Ethan, to kind of epistemically tease us out and get to God, I think is only possible because the foundation of ultimate reality is Himself intelligible, and so that would lead us to predict that we would have these kind of principles of reason, and so. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Christ is the logos, and He is the foundation of all intelligibility. And it's because of that that we have the principles of reason, and we can use those same principles of reason. Yeah.
He also says, "Let me in, and I'll continue destroying Travis."
Oh no!
No, I would agree with you, Travis.
Yeah.
You already know, and most of the people that watch any of my videos or keep up with any of my work, everybody knows I'm an evidentialist. So
yeah, and so I think I would tell Ethan, and I love you, Ethan, but I would tell him the same thing.
I love him more.
Yeah, you probably do. But it's like the same thing. I mean, there's no way of justifying that, and so why just? I don't want to use the word irrational, but why presuppose something like that when reason does lead us there? Why would you just presuppose it? It doesn't make sense. Oh, there's always that.
Daniel said he's coming back in. He's just getting his internet fixed and stuff. But yeah, okay. I would generally agree with you, Travis, and the way you kind of go about things is pretty much the same way I go.
I'm looking through the comments now. I went looking earlier because I wanted to make sure I listened to what Daniel had to say. I'm looking at Ethan's comments.
Ethan's so funny.
Yeah, I love Ethan.
But yeah,
totally disagree with you, but I love you.
Well, that's okay. So that's the whole entire point of why I'm saying this is a friendly inter-Christian discussion, right?
Yeah.
Where you and I are friends with a lot of people that are either presuppositionalists or even fideists
right.
and stuff, and there's just a difference in methodology at the end of the
day.
Yeah,
and so right. To be clear, Ethan is not a presuppositionalist. He would be. Yeah. I think it's a type of fideism. But a nuanced.
Yes.
Fideism. And hey, Daniel.
Hey, Daniel. He's probably still fixing this.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah.
Anyway, Daniel, when it's funny timing because we kind of hit that hour mark when you died out. So if you guys want to, we can kind of just start closing out, kind of giving some closing remarks here. And yeah.
Yeah. Daniel, did you want to go first or would you like me to? Daniel? I think there's a connection.
Yeah, we're having some connection issues, it seems like.
Okay, so Daniel, did you want to close out first, or would you like me to go first? Yeah, there might be like a bad. I'm sorry. I'll just go ahead and close that. I can't hear you. So yeah, really enjoyed this conversation. I think there's just so much, just the value of dialogue.
You guys hear me?
I'm one of those people.
Oh man, Travis,
Oh yeah.
you started acting out now too.
Okay, is my audio good?
Yeah, now you're good. Okay, Daniel, can you hear us?
Can you hear me? Oh boy.
Okay, Daniel,
we're
gonna let Travis do his little closing thing here, and then once your internet kind of fixes up here, if it does in the next few minutes, we'll give you then you can start.
Yeah, so I'll be brief. Yeah, so like I was saying, I really appreciate this conversation. I think there's a real value in dialogue, and I think dialogue, especially amongst believers, like really invites intellectual humility. I'm not one for like debates, point scoring, trying to one up somebody, insults, and just I find that really cringe and really distasteful in many instances. And I think Daniel and I exemplified Christian brotherly love and just discussing like a friendly coffee chat, discussing how we should approach natural theology and revealed theology, how they relate, do they relate, things like that. And so, at the end of the conversation, I think the Swinburnian method is in pretty good shape. I think we have a really good, rational, and reasonable basis, that has this proven track record in the philosophy of science for detecting true hypotheses that would lead us to expect, certain observations. When we apply that to ultimate reality, I think it works quite well for theism, and it would lead us to expect the observations that we have. And I totally respect those who disagree with that approach. And hopefully there can be more dialogue in the future.
Daniel?
Uh-oh.
He's muted still. He might be working with his thing. Internet still, maybe?
I don't know. Let's get Ethan in here. Come on, Ethan. Come on, Ethan. No, I'm just kidding. Ethan would kick my butt.
This was a really enjoyable conversation, though.
I love
even just from my perspective. Like you, Travis, we're both evidentialists, and you and I can probably agree on more stuff. We'll probably find more disagreements than agreements. I mean, more agreements than disagreements.
Right.
And so this is just kind of cool. I really appreciated this, and I would echo what you just said, that this was like the exemplification of Christian brotherly, loving discussion. And I'm glad I didn't have to step in.
No, and just in case Daniel for some reason isn't able to get back, I thought he had some really good things to say. I thought he was really clear and articulate and kind of like laying out why he disagrees and thinks that we should just start from Christianity and go from there, as opposed to starting out and then going up to Christianity. I appreciate that. I think he's very intelligent. I'm much more impressed with him than some of the other presuppositionalists I've had conversations with. And so, man, I think Daniel is a very bright guy, man.
I highly please go look at his stuff, people. And Daniel, if you can hear me, I do really appreciate your perspective. And if I didn't, I wouldn't have invited you on my channel for this.
Right.
Hold on, he said something in our private chat.
I'm sorry, his internet is.
That's totally fine, Daniel. If you can, at least you can hear us. I'll just mess.
Hey, somebody said this conversation was extremely enjoyable. Thank you. I couldn't agree more.
It's not a big deal. All that jazz. Well, okay. I kind of feel bad that his internet's acting up and towards the end when he can't kind of give his last word.
Yeah.
But such is life. Well, Travis, do you have anything else you want to kind of add in before we close out here?
No, I just really enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully Daniel and I can kind of do some more conversations. Maybe there's something we agree on. We can team up or something in the future. I'd love that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Daniel and Travis, thank you again for joining on and having such a cordial conversation. Again, I appreciate not having to step in. So you made my job as moderator very easy tonight. Thank you everybody again for listening. God bless. Until next time.
Take care. God bless.